All right, good evening, Chavra. Feels like it's been a long time since. How long has it been since we had this year? 2 weeks, right? 3 weeks. I thought 2 weeks ago was the Siyum. Last week I wasn't here. What was the week before? Chaim, there's no need to say it like that. There's no need.
Wow.
What time did I come, Chaim?
The food was here.
That was like 3 months ago.
The food ran out.
Thank you. You really make a guy feel good. Thank you. All right, Charo Baruch Hashem. It's a big zuchos. I have to tell you just where I was last Thursday. So I was in Eretz Yisrael. Last Thursday was the yard site of Reb Shlomo Carlebach. So they have every year by his yard site. He's buried in Har Menuchos in Yerushalayim. They have a huge gathering there. So someone took me, and they have like a kumzitz by the kever, which is really incredibly beautiful. And then they daven mincha. They daven mincha on the street of the cemetery, but it's not just a regular mincha. It's mamish like it's a mincha with nigunim, a mincha with singing. Mincha. This is a Thursday afternoon. Mincha was an hour and a half. Wow. Mincha was an hour and a half. It was such a beautiful. I'll tell you a funny story. So in the middle of davening mincha, and my phone. It was just my wife and I, so my kids are home, and I see my kids, I had like 15 missed calls from my kids. You know, you're away, it happens, you go. So my daughter comes, Daddy, you're on TV. I said, so they were live streaming on Israeli news, the Carlebach thing. And I realized I was standing right next to the Shliach Tzibor. I was standing right next to him because it was Simcha Hachbal from Chevron, who I happened to have a personal shaykhs. So he invited. I was standing right next to him.
So Rob didn't answer his phone.
So I did it right. I did it on the phone. So little did I know, mamish, like he was. But just so that's why it's sometimes like you realize that you could be worlds apart 1 week from another. I think like a week ago, mamish, and you should have seen like I had to touch. It's not for now, but. Har Menuchos, as I was on the way out of where Shlomo's buried, on the way out towards the street, that's also where the Chida, Chaim David Azulai, one of the great Mekubalim, is buried as well. So I went into his kever. We actually davened Ma'ariv, but by the time we finished Mincha, it was already time for Ma'ariv. Hey, so on the way out, they were still davening Mincha. I had to leave. I felt like a balabas. I'm like, shul is going too long over here. Shul is going too long, and there was nowhere to go for Kiddush. You know what I'm saying? So yeah. And by the way, it definitely, it was a new perspective. It was a new perspective. There was also a very long drasha, so now mamish, I got everything. I felt like a balabas. So on the way out, so I davened Ma'ariv on the way out, and then I was walking out with my wife. I said, let's stop in. Here's the kever of the Chida, and do you ever get to come to the kever of the Chida? So I'm davening in the kever of the Chida, and literally, I'm in the middle of davening. A guy walks in with a guitar into the kever of the Chida, and he just starts playing. He just starts playing the most stirring and beautiful nigunim I've ever heard in my life. I'm like, maybe it's sometimes it sounds funny. Sometimes you could find Olam Haba even in a cemetery. And you could even find Olam Haba in a base Olam. It's an incredible thing. But anyway, so Baruch Hashem last week was there. This week Baruch Hashem back here with all of you in the Piazetzna and the egg rolls. They were not egg rolls. They did not have egg rolls on Har Menuchos. That's a shas. So we'll say. So let's say it is. The truth is, wherever there are Jews, it's always better, and wherever the Piazetzna is, that's always where it's better as well. So we'll say. So we're continuing today in Meretz Hashem. We find ourselves in Oschas. Right, so Oschas. So we'll say we actually began this a little bit in the last shir, but it's kedai to kind of go back a little bit. So page 20, and again I made copies as well for anyone who needs. So we'll say let's begin. Right, to the Piazetzna. Shnei divarim nechutzim lanu u'shneim chaserim lanu. We'll say this. This line by itself is such a beautiful line. The Piazetzna writes, there are two things in life that are absolute necessities. And ironically, those are the two things that we often lack. Two things I need, nuchutzim, it's a necessity, and they're often the very same things that I lack. Says the Piaget, what are the things that I need? Hisrachbos v'shichlo ha-machshava. So I will say, one, of course, is the concept that we've been speaking about this entire time. Remember, hisrachbos means expansiveness, v'shichlo ha-machshava, and clarity of thought. So mindfulness, remember, again, that's been the topic the entire time. To become mindful, attentive people. To become thoughtful individuals. So on one hand, I need the expansiveness, clarity of thought, mindfulness. But what's the other piece I need? V'gam hisorus v'israkshus. I will say, how would you translate this? Hisorus v'israkshus. Hisorus means like an awakening. Hisrakshus, how would you translate that? Feeling or inspiration. Right? Regesh is a feeling. But we're just going to translate this as a phrase. Hisorus and Hisrakshus are going to translate as inspiration. Piaget says two things I need in life. Mindfulness and inspiration. And the two things that I need most in order to be successful are often the two things that what? That I lack. So both says, watch this. Be'emes, Piaget says, Be'emes, shneim shem echad heim. The truth is, these concepts are very much interlinked with one another. Ki b'shar she'echad omid chas v'shalom mitoch tzara, u'mispala laHashem, ein dimyon u'machshava chaselo. So we'll say, this is incredible. We've spoken about this before. We've all had those moments of life of tsar, just pain. And I will say, what happens in those moments of tsar? So ultimately, I daven, and there's a mindfulness in that tefillah. I will say, now, why is there an automatic mindfulness in prayer that comes in a state of tsar, in a state of pain? Because what does pain create? Need, right? And it's that need that ultimately creates a sense of inspiration. In other words, when I know that I'm in trouble and I need HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I am inspired to be able to connect with Him. I need Him. It's such an acute feeling. And in that moment of inspiration that's driven from need, there's also mindfulness. I will say, right? Isn't it amazing? Think about, because we've all had a moment like this where I have a tzara, I have a real challenge. You know what's amazing when you daven and you're in pain? What's amazing? What doesn't happen when you're in pain and you daven? Distraction. Right? Isn't it incredible, right? No one ever said, I had this horrible problem. I was diving to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for help, and you're not going to believe it. My mind wandered to my business. Isn't that incredible? Well, why is that? So the Piaget wants to suggest, because inspiration and mindfulness are linked. And often, again, he's giving the example over here of pain, and he's going to use, the Piaget is going to use pain as an anchor in this process, although it's not necessarily just linked to pain. But he's saying over here, when I daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, mitoch tzara, ein dimyon machshava chaselo, I'm not lacking mindfulness. I'm there. I'm attentive. I'm in. There's no wandering. There's no distractions. Ha'im b'shah, she'ish yisa mislahe b'yamim noraim, machshava chaserelo. They will say, during Yamim Noraim, when I'm davening, and I'm inspired, because remember again, even Yamim Noraim, I'm not inspired the entire time, but in those moments that I'm inspired, is mindfulness lacking for me? Do I have a problem concentrating? Again, he's trying to create this relationship between this sense of mindfulness, a sense of inspiration, and mindfulness. Lo, b'shar shemislaheb u'misorer hu below shu machshava, yesh lo machshava, hu choshev u'margish lefi matzavo, u'matzav hislavuso. So we'll say, it's an incredible thing. So in that moment, ultimately, of inspiration often reads mindfulness. And in that moment, and in that moment, I can literally visualize like I'm standing before God. There's no visualization problem. There's no mindfulness problem. I'm in. Lo es hamelech shenista berachok mimeno alfei parsos mifar mishabech. And again, I'm not relating to a God who's distant and far away. Who am I relating to? Rak es Hashem asher neged einov. I'm talking to God who is right next to me. Va'omer, l'cha Hashem agdula v'agvura, v'chei mispalo, avi av harachamon, aseli kach v'kach. When I'm in need, see, I will say when I'm in need, it's an incredible thing. When I'm in need, who do I talk to? I don't talk to God the King. I don't talk to God the Master. Who do I talk to? God my Father. God my Father. So I will say, you see this incredible relationship here, because in that moment when I'm inspired, and again, he's referring to over here an inspiration that comes, we'll call it, I guess what we'll call it is inspiration which stems from desperation, which often is the most profound kind of inspiration, right? Raymond, shalom aleichem. Hey, so take something to eat. Good. This chair over here. Good. So ultimately, again, so there's that. Thank you. There's that inspiration that comes from a sense of desperation, but in that moment, I have to just tell you something. This man got me from JFK to Baltimore in 3 hours. Only Mashiach on the wings of eagles could do that. And Ray Smith. Oh, Hashem, incredible. No, incredible. And it wasn't cheap. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying, But 3 hours, door to door. It's great. It's great. Yeah. Although I'll tell you, just hashgacha pratis in this. This is like mamish. Like I could tell. Sometimes you don't know where HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants you to be. It's clear to me HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted me to be back in Baltimore, because we had to fly through JFK.
3 hours from JFK to Baltimore.
Yeah. Right.
Sure was Newark.
No, it was JFK.
That's what he told you.
See, I'm telling you. I'll tell you even better. I landed and was out of the airport within 30 minutes.
Wow.
Oh my God. International?
Yeah, from Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, back to the PHS.
You have to go back and get your wife.
Yeah. I forgot my wife at the airport. She's still there. Right. I knew something was missing. I didn't know what it was.
Try.
So you talked to Ray the whole way back. That's why.
Oh, Ray's good. I actually caught up on all my email. That's what I did. All right, in any event, we'll say, so now the Piaget now it's as follows. So there is that inspiration that comes from desperation. And in that moment, at the end of the day, there is that mindfulness that comes as well. And the Piaget says that inspiration that comes creates a closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He says, Rach, shemachshava zu, sheyesh b'shas lavos, i'efshar lo lahasigu latavsa achakach. So I will say, here's what's incredible. What's sometimes the most difficult part of that moment of inspiration? What's the most difficult part? The most difficult part often is that you can't recreate it. Right? So I have that moment of inspiration, and then when I want to try to reclaim it later on, I can't get it. I can't take hold of it again. And the Piaget writes something, he says something so beautiful. He explains, Mibnei shemitzara haisa kekatnos eslavos va'beis. So we'll say. So first of all, he's going to explain issue number one. And there's a number of different things that are unfolding over here. The first is the premise of the Piagetzna, and the premise ultimately is that where there is mindfulness, mindfulness and inspiration are interdependent. They go together. And therefore, again, where there is one, by definition, ultimately, again, it yields the other as well. Now, we're going to see that relationship takes on different forms in different ways, but often there's that interconnection. Number two, where there is that sense of inspiration, ultimately there's a sense of closeness. Now, the Piaget, like I said before, is focusing on this inspiration which comes from desperation. After the desperation passes, it's often difficult to reclaim that sense of inspiration. So why is that? So he says, because first of all, inspiration, which comes from desperation, is the lowest form of inspiration, right? Which makes sense. In other words, when I'm inspired because what's my choice? I will say, what is it? There's no atheist in the foxhole. When you're down and out and you're in trouble and you need HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of course, I'm going to come close to him. So there's an inspiration that comes from that, but that's a low form of inspiration. I will say, what's the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal in life is to feel inspired and feel connected, even when things are great. Right? On a given day, when everything is going according to plan, I tell you, we should be zocheh to a day like that, right? On a given day, where everything is just Baruch Hashem working out well, to feel a sense of connection, even then, that's the highest level. Connection from tsar works, but l'maaseh, so therefore, once that inspiration from desperation passes, it's difficult to reclaim it. Beis, kevan sheshuba machshava gufnis hu bala adina, or machshava gufnis zu, rak machshava, ba'ala sirva dimyon, yachal lachshava v'lo zulasa. Second issue, writes the Piagetz, is what? Is this idea that here's what happens, Rav Osai. Remember, inspiration and mindfulness, what's the common denominator between the two of them? Is that they're not rooted in the physical reality of my life. Right? Just like mindfulness is a step above my physical reality, inspiration is also a step above my physical reality. So what's the problem? Often when the inspiration passes, I try to reclaim it, but I'm trying to reclaim it from a state of physicality. I'm back now in my gufni state, in my physical state, and I'm trying to reclaim something that is not part of the realm of the physical. Now again, this is all going to make a little bit more sense in a bit. He says, Kol israkshus v'islavos ha'yisraeli, min iskalos hanefesh chutz migufa. Skip a little bit. Machshava tahora. So writes the Piagetz now. Something very interesting. He says as follows. Machshava tahora, tuluya bis orus v'islavos. Purity of thought. Now I will say we're using a lot of terms interchangeably as well, because purity of thought also refers over here to the concept of mindfulness. So this idea, this purity of thought, this mindfulness, tuluya, is dependent on inspiration. So we'll say, we just pivoted a little bit over here, because what the Piagetz said before is both mindfulness and inspiration are shnehem shehem echad. They're two things that are one. Here, the Piagetz goes ahead and really sharpens it a little bit, and he says, Machshava tahora, purity of thought or mindfulness, is fundamentally dependent on inspiration. So we'll say, so look what we've just done over here. The Piagetz now has just informed us that the way to achieve a sense of mindfulness, of awareness, and remember again, we've defined this entire time, according to the Piagetz now, what does it mean to be mindful? What it means to be mindful is to be ever cognizant of the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samid. But to be aware of a God who's not a master, but to be aware of a God who's what? Who's what? Or not a king, but a father, a sense of closeness. Now the Piagetz says, by the way, you know how to get there? And by the way, he's given us a couple of answers how to get there. Right? You talk about Emunah Pshuta, simple faith. Here the Piagetz says the way to get there is inspiration. You need to be inspired in order to be able to get to a state of mindfulness. Ki ilmole haya yochel ha'ish l'rachich es libo, or le'eslaif tamid. Rabbi said, listen to these words. If a person were able to soften his heart and be perpetually inspired, haisa machshavto yosenekia, I'd be a mindful person. So now what he's saying about is that at the end of the day, the key to mindfulness, the key to clarity of thought, is a sense of inspiration. Page 21. Conversely, I will say, if I was more mindful, I could also be more inspired. So we're going to see really the two, like they're one. They're one. Mindfulness and inspiration. Now, what we're really going to see, as much as he's saying, if you're inspired, you can be mindful, and if you're mindful, you can be inspired, really the way it's going to work, is inspiration is going to be the gateway to mindfulness. If somehow I could tap in and harness an inspired life, or create an inspired life, that's what creates what he calls the clarity of thought, the purity of thought, and the mindfulness of life. Lachin, b'shneihem tzarich hayisraeli la'avod u'lagadol es machshavto bis orus hislavu. So therefore, again, says the Piagetz, I have to work on both of these things. I have to work ultimately, again, on increasing my machshava, clarity of thought, mindfulness, and at the same time enhancing and increasing my sense of inspiration. So we'll say, so now let's begin to dig into this. He says, Emor me'ata lo levad be'inyan hisrachvos hamachshava tzrichim ledaber, rak gam eich la'orer is hisla'avos halev. Nechapes eitzos v'tachpos. We'll say, so now what's the $1 million question? What's the $1 million question? Which for many of us is the $1 million question, even before we start learning the Sefer, is how do I get inspired?
How do you get inspired without the mindfulness? I don't understand how mindfulness
so wait,
can come first.
good, let's see, good. You're saying why?
Because
Don't you have to have an awareness in order to
Yeah,
be good?
inspiration
Hold
is
on.
not how you base it.
Hold on. You're absolutely right. He's going to show us in just a second. Now, the Piaget's, before he explains, so Meir's question is good because it sounds like intuitively mindfulness should be the first step. In other words, if we understanding mindfulness essentially as God awareness, so isn't God awareness a prerequisite ultimately to inspiration? So we'll explain this in just a moment. But the Piaget says, let's focus now a little bit on inspiration. How do I become inspired? Let's find some strategies, some ideas. So the Piaget says his lashon over here is a very strong lashon. He says, let's try to find strategies to become inspired. And hopefully Hashem will help us. He'll illuminate our eyes and help us at the end of the day. His lashon is to raise ourselves out from the impurity that we are stuck in up until our necks. So it's a strong. In other words, what Rav say, remember again, what the Piaget is highlighting. Why is he using this lashon over here? Because the truth is, Rav say, what's the greatest obstacle ultimately again to inspiration? I'm sorry. What's the greatest obstacle to inspiration? The greatest obstacle is I'm often in life surrounded by negativity and impurity. Right? In other words, there's so much stuff that's happening in my life that's holding me back. That's what it is. In other words, like Chazal call it Tova-11-17-22 biyado. Right? The person goes to the mikvah, only one problem, they're holding a dead rodent in their hand. Right? So you can go up, down, in, out, backflips, everything in the mikvah, right? It doesn't make a difference. Your tummy, because you're holding on to that source of impurity. How many times does it happen in life? I'm doing this, I'm doing that. It's only one problem. I'm not letting go of the impurity. And if I don't let go of and I will say, by the way, if we're honest, because Erev Shabbos is a good time to be honest, right? Which is something interesting. A lot of times we don't get traction in life. We just don't get traction, right? And I'm doing good stuff, right? I'm trying, but I'm not moving myself forward. If we're honest, more often than not, the reason I don't move myself forward is because I am unwilling to let go of my sherets. It's not that I'm not doing good things. I'm doing a lot of great things in life. But I love that sheret. I love him. He's been with me this entire time. I've named him. I pet him. I talk to him, right? He's been with me right through good times, bad times, peaks, valleys, right? I'm not willing to let go. And it sounds so foolish when we talk about it. But listen, we all do it. We have character traits, I know that are bad. Behaviors, I know that are bad. Friends, they're not a good influence, right? Behaviors, hobbies, different things. I know. It's my sherets, but it's my beautiful little sherets, right? We've been together for years. Okay, so you can do whatever you want in life, but at the end of the day, if that sherets is still there, that's the Piaget means. The Piaget says, maybe there's a way. Obviously, you have to let go of your sherets, but after I let go of my sherets, maybe there's a way just that I can lift myself forward in life. So I'll say, look what he writes. Bnai. Im lahaschel berishon bis oru shel kedusha. So the Piaget says, if we're gonna focus over here on trying to achieve inspiration through the soul. Maybe that's, in other words, that sounds like the first step. What inspiration comes from within. Okay, so what do I have to do with my neshama in order to go out and be inspired? Says the Piaget, it's not a bad approach. Because remember again, he already spoke about this. Anything in life that has to begin with the soul, you've probably lost the battle before you even started. Because it's very hard to control the soul. The one thing I can control much more is what? It's the body. So let's start with inspiration. Look what he writes. Nashuv el darkina l'redes al tachtis gufo shel adam u'misham la'aloso. V'naschil ba bis orus gufnis. So this is incredible. Let's not start with spiritual inspiration, but rather with physical inspiration. Now, what does that mean? Ki ka'amor kolis orus afilu im gufnis hu mafteach lenefesh. Because the truth is, any form of inspiration, even physical inspiration, ultimately is a pathway to spiritual inspiration. He goes on, mashal ish, says, this mashal is so beautiful. He gives a parable. Mashal ish she'elilu al beno. V'nasnu b'masar. So we'll say there's a story, a mashal, write a parable. Imagine a man has a son, and his son was incarcerated. Son was put in jail. The Efshalo also bilti kishesar beis hasar paseach v'nichnas elov lach kores mishpato. And the only time that the father has the ability to go and see his son is when the warden goes in to see the prisoner. So right, there's no visiting hours. So only when the warden goes in to see the prisoner, the father could go in with the warden to see his son. Okay. So what? V'nichnas elov lach kores mishpato. So we'll say, so now again, remember, the father, when he goes in to see his son, what does he have to do? He has to talk about the case, he has to talk about the trial, he has to talk about the appeal, he has to talk about all the legal details, right? So now again, the father only has one opportunity to go in. All he could do is go ahead and go when the warden goes in. So there's so much to talk about, else the case. So look at the Piaget writes, Ha'av ha'pesi, if the father is a fool, kevan shelitzorach mishpato pascho, gam hu eno medaber rak imo me'inyan mishpato. So if the father is a fool, what does he do? He goes in, and when the warden goes in, what does the father do? He pulls up a chair, he says, okay, let's talk strategy. Let's talk strategy. What are we going to do? I called the attorney, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. And the father uses his entire time just to talk legal strategy with his son. And what happens? V'achacham omer, if the father is wise, he says, Heit emes shesar beis hasar pasach. It's true that the only reason I got in here is because the warden got me in order to go out and speak about legal issues. Aval benkach ubenkach halo kvar pasuach. But once my son's cell is open and I have access, I should take advantage. Ubini lefanai, my son's right here. Achabkeu va'anashkeu, let me hug him, let me kiss him. Va'daber imo divrei ahuvim ke'aval beno. Let me tell him how much I love him. But you hear this mashal? Hear this mashal? The father's only getting in because the warden gave him some time. Why? Because you have to give the prisoner time to consult with legal counsel. So the father's going in, he's got legal issues to talk about with his son. So if the father is a fool, he'll go in, talk about legal issues, and then what? He'll leave. But if the father is wise, he'll recognize that I know I'm only here because of legal issues. But once I'm here, it's my father and it's my son. I'm going to hug him, I'm going to kiss him, I'm going to let him take advantage of the opportunity. So the Piaget says, what was it? What's the nimshal? What's the message? Kolis rakshus davar midivrei ha'olam posachos nitzutz menafsho. Supposed to say, this is incredible. Any time in life that you feel something, any time in life that you have a feeling, that's like the cell has been opened. The cell has been opened. And now I have a chance to visit with my son. Who's my son in this case? My neshama. So I could just go in and talk with the son about the things that are necessary, the utilitarian pieces, or I can say, listen, neshama, we've got a lot to talk about on a metzias, on a practical level. But now that you're here, I'm going to hug you, I'm going to kiss you, I'm going to go ahead and make the most of this moment. He says, this is incredible. He says, Aval benkach niskal hanefesh ma'at, lochein nishtadel v'notzia yoser, v'nesrapek aleh b'divrei ava v'yira u'machshava tohora la'Hashem. V'chevan shekach shegam esrakshus gufnis, posachos u'megala ma'ates nafshenu, kavar yesh biyadir ma'ala haschil, u'b'ma litvok al pischil levavenu, likra osa michutz l'shari abarza sha'asar sham. So I will say, this to me is something absolutely incredible. What the Piaget says is, the first step to inspiration is in those moments where you're experiencing some level of elevated feeling, of elevated emotion, use that as an opportunity to connect with your neshama. Well, so I'll give you a good example of this. I don't know why. Sometimes, a person goes to a chasana, right? I don't know. I find chasanas very emotional. Very emotional, right? You go to a chasana, I think I was a woman in a previous Gilgal, right? right. You go, right? You come, right? It's something so beautiful. The shechina's there, the neshamas are there. It's incredible. So we'll say, what do you do in that moment? And by the way, you can say it anything. In other words, it's anything. Everybody has emotional moments where they see something. So that moment, says the Piaget. Now, is that an inspired moment? I don't know that I'm not inspired at the chasana. I'm not inspired at the wedding, but I feel something that I don't normally feel. So the Piaget says, what do you do with that moment of feeling? What do you do with it? So we'll say, so often what we do with it is we say, oh yeah, I cry at weddings. That's what I do, right? I'm emotional at weddings. It moves me. Says the Piaget, that's like the father, where the cell is open, he goes in, he talks to the son about the legal case, and doesn't even give his son a hug. The cell is open. In those moments of feeling, the cell is open. You see, I will say, what's amazing so often is that, and we'll talk about this a little bit, a lot of times in life we're scared to feel. We're scared to feel. Like, if I begin to feel something, whether we realize that a lot of times, like, I put the kibosh on that. Like, I'm not a feelings guy. I'm not a feelings guy. And I will say, everybody's a feelings guy. Just some people are ready to embrace it, and some people run away from it like scared little children. But Lamaisa, in that moment of feeling, says the Piagetzna, the cell is open. The cell is open. Do something with it. Now, that's not a spiritual experience yet. That feeling that you have, and I will say, by the way, you could plug in the feeling whenever, in whatever situation you want. It comes in so many different ways. There are different things that make us emotional. But in that moment of heightened emotion, the cell is open. Build on that. I'll give you an example of it. Like Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, I think I mentioned this before. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev says such a beautiful idea. The Rebbe says, he's also talking about inspiration. And the Rebbe says, like, if you ever feel inspired, if you feel like an inspired moment, the Rebbe says you have to do something. And he says, even if you open up a Chumash and just read a pasuk, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Lemar, good, you've done something with your inspiration. As opposed to just like a feeling comes, and then what happens? What happens? It goes, and I have nothing to show for it. Plug it into. So the Piagetzna is talking, even he's not even telling you to do something. What he's telling you is, in that moment where your heart is a little softer, you're feeling a little bit more, that's the beginnings of inspiration. You got to do something with it. Now, the what, we're going to see in just a moment. Piagetzna goes on.
Why just focus so much on avodah? Trying to inspire the neshama, physical stuff.
100%. So Meir is saying good. In other words, this idea that by Chassidus, that a focus even on mundane physical things, like the kiddushin eating, the kiddushin making a l'chaim, is exactly this idea. Exactly this. Because what the Piagetzna is saying is, all you need to do to create inspiration is to create a sense of heightened emotion. If you could create sense of heightened emotion, that opens the cell. Once the cell is open, the neshama, which often remains incarcerated within us, the cell's open. Cell's open. Now, you could go in and do something. Now, what you're going to do, how you're going to do, that's what we're going to see. But all I need to do, and I will say, by the way, all this is happening on a physical level. Right? These are not spiritual things that he's describing yet. This is something physical happens, and I feel just a heightened sense of emotion. Fantastic. Cell's open. Cell's open. First step. Brother, you going to say something?
During Shemona Esrei, should instead of like focusing on things a person may need, shidduchim, children, parents, whatever, should the focus be away from that, just on the relationship? Like, here's your opportunity. Why are we talking like lawyer stuff, things that you need to focus more on the relationship?
Baruch Shekivanta. So the Piaget is going to talk about that. What you're describing, of course, is the ideal of tefillah. Right? The ideal of tefillah is, why do I daven? For relationship. But I'm going to do one even better, which is based on what the Piaget is saying is, no, daven for all of your stuff. Because if you're davening for something, and you really feel that you need it, and that need creates a sense of emotion inside of you, then suddenly that need has opened your cell. So it turns out that davening for the need is in and of itself the first step to inspiration. It's such a dramatically different way to look at things. And it's just, I just want to point out, what it's doing is it's taking this concept of inspiration, which so often is just like this amorphous, ambiguous thing. Right? Everybody wants to be inspired. What does it mean to be inspired? What does it look like to be inspired? How do you get inspired? No one can answer any of these questions. The Piaget says, okay, let's start at the beginning. Amplified emotion is the way to start. That opens the cell. The Piaget goes on, he says, L'chi adi es Hashem l'mashal. So we'll say, he gives an example of this. L'mashal, kol ish avar alav kivar daiga shal atzmo. Ozula, so Belly, this is really to your point. He gives the mashal. He says, every person right, has something that he worries about. Right, some worry that he had or that someone else that he knows had. So we'll say, so here he's describing every person has that moment in life where I'm suffering with something, or someone that I care about is suffering with something, and I care about that person so much that what? It's as if I'm suffering with that thing. I think we could most closely relate to this with children. Right, when my child, how does it go? What's the expression? You're only as happy as
your saddest child.
As your saddest child, right? Right. So I don't know if it's totally true, but there's an element to it. In other words, when my child is suffering, I feel that pain. Okay, so look what he writes. He says, "Asher b'choleis shezocher osa u'mitzayer osa b'dimyon chazak ki'ilu hi leneged einav libo misrachik u'misragish af bocha." So what's what the Piazetzna says? He says, sometimes like you have a situation in life that is incredibly painful. So what happens? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu blessed us with the ability to suppress certain things. And the truth is, that is an incredible bracha. Right? Why? Because if we didn't have the koach of suppression, what would happen? Right? You'd be effectively paralyzed in life. So what I have the ability to do is, even though again I have a serious problem or problems, I have the ability to kind of push it back a little bit to the recesses, right, and function and focus on other things as well. But says the Piazetzna, sometimes in life I have that thing that is so painful that the moment that I bring it up to the frontal lobe, right, and the moment that I begin to cogitate on it and think about it, it causes me so much pain that I begin to cry. And even if I don't cry, I feel very emotional about it. So the Piazetzna says, "Sir osan gam ata lefanecha, v'haya kasher rak tisorer bis orus shivrol neif tala libcha, v'lama li lishbar es libi v'lifkos larik." Hello, page 22. Hello, Hashem lefanecha. I just want to tell you something. The Piazetzna has such an amazing approach. Listen to what he says. I will say, sometimes the way to go ahead and create inspiration is to create heightened emotion. How do you create heightened emotion? By sometimes thinking about the thing.
That's what I was going to tell you.
That what?
What I was going to say was, why don't you treat this whole thing like building blocks? So we're at this level, we really don't know what to do. So I would say, what I was going to say, and I've been thinking about it 30 minutes, is the original thing you said, I think about the beginning of the class, was imagination. You had to have imagination. So instead of trying to figure out what God looks like or whatever, you're close to Him, imagine your pain. And if you imagine your pain, it's going to get you inspired again. That's like, you said it's the lowest level. But if I were teaching this class, I would say,
I'm happy to take off.
Can I take your shovel away?
Yeah. 3 hours.
You ready? Let's go.
No, but if I were, I'd say, okay, guys, we're on a base level. So this week, I'd give us homework, and I'd say, okay, not every day, but like maybe 2 or 3 times in the next week, think of something that's very painful, be by yourself, and then build it up and imagine you're with God turning to Him. Okay, now you've had a week of thinking about pain. Now we're going to go to the next highest level next week to get to the... That's what I would have.
Excellent. And you're saying exactly what the Piazetzna is saying. Excellent. That's exactly what he's describing right now in these lines we just read. Beautiful. And beautifully said. Which I will say is, and it sounds like a strange thing, because who wants to conjure up their pain? I just want to point out, it's so interesting that we live in a society that is so pain averse, right? We don't like pain. So whatever you need to do to get rid of your pain, whatever you have to take, whatever you have to, right? Don't feel pain. And what the Piazetzna is saying is something absolutely amazing, which is sometimes the way to become inspired is to dafka summon up your pain, which is such an incredible idea. First of all, I'll say just from a resiliency perspective, the ability of embracing your pain. Don't run from your pain. Don't hide from your pain. Embrace the pain. Acknowledge the pain. And the Piazetzna says, and what he's telling you even more, like Ramat just said, is bring it. Bring the pain. Bring it because That ultimately, again, what that does is, in the Piagetzna's words, in other words, it brings you right before God. It brings you right before God. And I will say, remember again, what's the chap? When I come right before God, the cell is open. Right before God, I don't struggle with imagination. I don't need imagination, right? Because the imagination is already there. In other words, when I'm in pain and I'm right before Hashem, I don't need to imagine what God looks like or what it means to. I'm there. I'm there. The pain has opened the cell, brought me right next to my neshama, right next to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So says the Piagetna, it's incredible that sometimes the first step to inspiration, the baseline to inspiration, summon up a painful moment, allow those waves of pain to go through you. In that moment of amplified emotion, you feel a sense of closeness, you feel a sense of connection, and that is what inspiration, at least the beginning of inspiration, truly is. Such an amazing and incredible idea. He goes on, he says, at page 22, Afka lifnei Hashem shomea kol b'chios, Machshava v'dinyon shel eitzas haray v'zal haniskal techsak yoser v'yoser eicha lisa atla lifnei kisi hakav l'fanav. He's powerful. Schus nesuna. So we'll say, if you skip down a little bit, he says, v'im esher lecha leis ora midaiga sha'avra. So I will say, so now listen to this. Okay, so the PHS is creating a model, right? And in the model, again, remember, let's just trace our steps back here for just a moment. We started tonight by saying that there are two concepts that are interlinked, right? Mindfulness and inspiration. And the PHS made aside, they're really, one requires the other. Now what we're looking at in the model over here is that really it's inspiration which ultimately yields mindfulness. So therefore my first goal is to create a sense of inspiration. How does one create a sense of inspiration? Piagetna points out amplified emotion. Amplified emotion allows you to create that sense of inspiration. Why? Pain is an easy one to remember, because if I allow myself to feel pain by definition brings me close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because I often recognize in times of acute pain, there is no one else who could extract me from my pain except Hashem. So therefore, by definition, there's a reliance, there's a connection, the cell is open. Now again, I will say, is that the purest form of inspiration? No, but that's okay. I don't need the purest form. What do I need?
Gotta get there.
I just need the cell opened, right? Like his mashal. All I need is the cell, is the door of the cell to be opened. Once that's opened, that's the beginning of my journey of inspiration. And then I will say again, there are multiple steps after that, but at least that's the first. Now the Piagetna says, I'll just read more line, we'll stop over here for tonight, but he says, actually we'll finish this. He says, but let's say a person says, you know what? I don't have any pain in my life. I'd love to meet that person, right? I don't have any pain. And maybe, or maybe a person will say, or maybe a person says like this, I have pain, but the truth is my pain is like from earlier times in my life. And so when I think about it, it doesn't really bring up that much emotion. That can happen, right? In other words, we all have past painful moments that Baruch Hashem, I've dealt with, and thank God, hope maybe they've even had a good resolution. And now what I'm holding in life right now, you know, when I think about it, it doesn't go ahead and bother me, or it doesn't go ahead necessarily and elicit intense emotion. So what should you do? The Rebbe said, this is incredible. He says, Yaseh ke'ezas hagimara, yaskir lo yom hamisa. So Rebbe said, remember death. Remember death. Avalo b'rayon greido klali, hagemara omeres, yodin harishon v'chuli v'zech yisoron shirak yodin. Yedia klalo she'eno shaveres haleber pitprut. He says, when I say remember death, I don't just mean remember that one day we die. Think about death in a very personal way. Look what he writes. Yitzayer es hadavar she'over al kol ish la'achar arichos yom shnosav. Think about, say, what death will look like for you. And a good death, meaning I live a long life, right? The Mir Hashem, I'm old. Eich yistakel beregal la'achar kol ha'olam. So I will say, how would I look at the world? Imagine I'm in my final moments in life. When I look at the world and I look at my life, how do I look at it? Am I happy with the life I led? Am I okay with taking leave of the world? If I see my children around my bedside and I realize I'm about to die, and take leave of them? Am I ready to leave my family? V'laleches begufo al tachlis afarimo v'talea, u'benishmasu ala derech she'ina yidu alo, ani olicha osa. And when I leave this world, at the end of the day, I don't know where I'm going. I'd like to think I'm going up, but I don't know. I don't know at the end of where I'm going. Banav yisobavu v'yivku v'yitzaku hai avi. Imagine the scene. Around your bed, your children are there, and they're crying, Father, Father, don't leave us. Oh havav umishpachto yemo vikru. Your family, your loved ones are calling out to you. V'hu shomeo mevin hakol. And I hear, and I understand everything. V'efsho lo la'azar mu'uma. And I could do nothing to soothe the pain of my family. My family is watching me leave this world. I see that I'm leaving this world, and there's nothing I can do to make the situation better. Rotze u'mischanin hu lachios, aval halev dochek ad kedei lispaka, v'agoron miskabetz ad kedei lichonek, u'bechazaka korim es nishmaso migrono v'libo. And all I want to do is live. All I want to do is live. All I want to do is be in this world. All I want to do is be with my children. All I want to do is be with my family. But yet, I feel my soul being removed from my body. And then I see, even now as I passed, I see, because the neshama sees everything, my neshama sees my body being taken for burial. Banav zematiaches rosha b'kolsa v'tzoik u'bocha, avi, eich azavtanu. And I see my children crying, Father, Father, how did you leave us? How could you have been torn away from us? And I see my daughter throwing herself on the ground and crying out, Father, how could I go on without you? If only Hashem had taken me and not taken you. And my children are crying and tears until it feels like their hearts are going to burst. The sounds of their cries put fear in both the living and the dead. Everyone sees my family mourning, and they're moved by the mourning of my family. And I will say what happens when the Levai is over. Everyone goes home. Except who? Except me. Except me. I stay there. And again, I stand there all alone. Or I lay there all alone. As so what is the Piaget referring to over here? What it's referring to over here is there's an easy way to go ahead and evoke emotion. If you think about the fact that one day you're going to leave. You're going to leave your family. You're going to leave your family behind. And as much as you love them and they love you, and as much as the neshama is eternal, the relationship we know, which is in the physical world, is going to come to an end. And there's going to be pain. And there's going to be sadness. And there's going to be heartbreak. And I'm going to see all of that. The Piaget says, As betach yisrachech gam lev ha'even umin ha'merirus v'israk shozu yale al tefillah ritzuya. Says the Piaget. If you allow the pain of this experience to course through you, the heart becomes softened. The door of the cell is opened up. And the amplified emotion allows me a sense of closer connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's inspiration. That's inspiration. He says, Lo his orurus, lo machshava yisiru, af lo amuna ahava. He says, ultimately, again, an experience like this, I'm not going to be lacking inspiration. I'm not going to be lacking mindfulness. Everything comes together. Amuna, ava, and yira Hashem. So we'll stop over here for tonight. But again, the Piaget's really describing this incredibly profound dynamic. This incredibly profound dynamic of sometimes the first step to inspiration is just allowing myself to feel specifically pain. Now, the truth is, we're going to see it's not just pain. You could actually achieve the same thing with incredible simcha as well. Rabbi say, but we all know, everyone knows. Right? First of all, growth doesn't come from blessing. That's usually the case. And also, just the way it is in life, that I can have the greatest bracha in the world and be filled with gratitude to Hashem. The closeness that gratitude engenders is never the same closeness that pain engenders. There's something about the vulnerability of pain that just throws me into the arms of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So I will say, isn't it incredible? It says the Piazetzna. First step, ultimately again, to inspiration is allowing myself to feel the pain of my experiences. And if you're one of those fortunate people who does not have painful experiences, the Piazetzna paints a pretty striking image, a pretty striking vision of the Olam of the day of death. And I will say, I want to point out, it's not that the Piazetzna is a downer, right? This is not like, oh my gosh, I came out on Thursday night with this, right? I got like this whole image of what it means to die. Like, this is like pretty heavy stuff. I could have been on Netflix, so again, I just want to point out, we'll say, what the Piazetzna is doing is, do we want to grow or don't want to grow? Right? So we'll say, so again, people who don't want to grow, they're focused on one thing, feeling happy. I just want to feel happy. I just want to feel good. Okay, that's great. If you want to feel happy, it's a lot of great ways to help you feel happy. But I will say, if I want to grow, growth is difficult. And growth is almost always cultivated with a pathway of pain. It's always the way that it works. What the Piazetzna is saying, I will say, is pain is part of the fabric of the human condition. All of us have pain. So the good news is, because we all have it, we can all use it. I just have to be brave enough to allow myself to let the pain course through me, to embrace the pain. And I think what Ramat suggested Rabbi say is because now what I want to begin, because I want to, what we need to start doing now is we've learned enough now to begin, or as Ramat called it, homework. I was going to call it, I guess you call it homework. Right? So, which is to begin to we got to begin to put this into practice. And so I think Ramat's suggestion of figuring out how 3 times throughout 2, 3, whatever amount of time, but going through this process when you have the time. And by the way, it's not during davening. I just want to point out, this is not during davening, right? People are going to see you crying and this and that. It's going to cause a whole. And also because davening, truth is, you focus on davening. This really is carving out 20 minutes when you are alone, not with your spouse, not with your friends, by yourself, in a quiet place, and go.
It's not gonna
Not going to happen. I'm sorry?
Can we wait till we get to the
Yeah,
positive
sorry.
part?
Well, no, I think both. I think both because, again, you need both. Because in every time in life, right, in life, ultimately, again, there's pain. And then there's also good stuff. So in other words, you have to know how to work. You have to know how to work the mechanism. Or really, the truth is, I don't know what the Piazetzna is giving us. Piazetzna is giving us a program, right? You have to know how to work the program, right? Both from a perspective of pain and a perspective of joy. We'll get to the joy Meretz Hashem next week. I will say, but to try this, to set aside 20 minutes. You're right. It's hard. No. It is. No, it's hard. It's hard. I will say one of the hardest things today is the ability to find solitude with oneself. I will say, for a variety of different reasons. But if we could just carve out 20 minutes for ourselves and ultimately, again, allow to go through this process. Summon up for yourself your most painful life moment. Your most painful life moment. Go for the gold. The most painful life moment. Relive that moment. Allow that pain to course through you. Embrace the pain. Accept the pain. And ultimately, again, when that happens, see if you feel any closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Piazetzna tells us that if we really go through the process and embrace the pain, the door of the cell is opened, the father gets to visit the son, I am pushed into the arms of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the result of that painful experience is the beginning sparks of inspiration. So that's our homework in Meretz
Can I say
Hashem.
one more thing?
Please.
So, in Chassidus, it's called hisbodedus. That's like the generic term, right? Am I right?
Absolutely.
So I've been doing hisbodedus for 6 years, every day, except Shabbos. I can't do it more than 7 minutes. I just can't. I run out of things to say. But I can tell you To do that for 20 minutes would scare me to death.
No, but remember, this is different because his podedus is actually sometimes like a clearing of the mind and just the conversation. The PhD is describing something different over here. Our goal over here is to draw on something specific in my life.
I haven't. I mean,
This is
have
different.
enough pain daily that I don't have to draw it on. You know, so
Well, that's good.
yeah. But
Matt,
seriously,
you're already ahead of the game.
I do feel closer. Much. I mean, 6 years later,
After the
I couldn't-
experience.
I mean, I can't. I'm so far ahead of where I was that I think to do it for 20 minutes in this. I mean, I'm just
Right.
in all respect, I just think it's a long time to try to do it.
You could do it for however long you want. I happen to think that if we're doing what the Piagetna says, first of all, you need to sit down and think about which painful experience you're going for.
Right.
In other words, and I will tell you what's happened, because I've tried this. I'll tell you what's fascinating. What happens is there's a lot of time that's spent on trying to figure out which painful experience I should focus on. Because what you begin to realize is I've got a whole bunch of stuff that I pushed to like the deepest recesses of my mind that I haven't thought about for years. So I said 20 minutes because I know, I think that probably 12 minutes of it is like going through the reel of this is your life and seeing like,
possible.
oh, that happened, that. But the timing is, every person does their own thing. I was saying 20 minutes. It could be 3 minutes, whatever it is. The point is to try to go through this process. And ultimately, again, the Piaget says if I'm brave enough, because it's not Pashut, if I'm brave enough, that's the first step to inspiration. So we'll stop over here for tonight. Heavy stuff tonight in Mir Hashem. We do get to joy as well in Mir Hashem. Shkayach, everyone. We'll say Ma'ariv.
Yeah.
It's all good to see you. Good Shabbos.